Dr. Nabila Idris on Bangladesh context. Thank you, Doctor.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for inviting me to this event, and thank you to my wonderful panelists. I've talked to each of them, and I find them very fascinating. Once I am done with the speech, I hope I will be able to get 3 key takeaway points across to you. The first is that crimes like torture and enforced disappearance happen because they can happen in the dark, because of invisibility. Second, that by doing what we're doing here and trying to stop these crimes, we are not merely helping victims, we are also helping the security forces, the officers and the soldiers and the guards. And the third, that in Bangladesh, the system is struggling to develop not because of technical reasons, but because of political reasons. So once I'm done, I hope I'll be able to get these 3 points across to you. Amira has done a wonderful job in talking about NPM, so I will not need to go into details about what it is. But my point stands, which is that the reason such crimes happen is because they can happen in the dark, outside a watchdog's eyes, and because of invisibility. There's a cloak of invisibility. And NPM, or National Preventive Mechanism, allows you to visit places of detention unannounced at whatever interval you choose, and they have to let you in. This sort of watchdog effect has impact in how victims and law enforcement function within areas of detention. I can give some examples from my own work. So there is this professor of a university who was picked up by the police, and he was tortured brutally. He was very brutally tortured. I have taken his testimony myself. He would break down every time he described to me what had happened. What is interesting is what happened after the torture. He was kept in a detention cell. I visited that detention cell, and in fact, by an act of coincidence, I actually found the officer already detained there, because after August 2024, he was taken into custody. And he was actually detained in the same detention cell where he'd kept this professor. Now, this professor said to me that on the night after one of these tortures, when all his limbs had stopped moving, and he was kept in that cell, this officer visited him. And the reason he visited him is because he had seen through CCTV, so he'd gotten his eyes on the detention cell, he'd seen that the professor was praying tahajjud, but because he couldn't move any of his limbs, he was praying with just his finger and his eyes, and the officer had seen the repetitive movement of the finger and figured out what this detainee was doing, and so he'd come and talk to him. And what they had talked about was essentially very human. Because he'd been praying tahajjud, the officer started to talk to imagined him to be, and correctly imagined him to be, quite a religious person. And so he shared with him his woes, which was like he was struggling to have children, and so could this person he tortured a few hours ago pray for him? And these are the things this gentleman remembered. He told me afterwards, he said, this is what the officer told me, and these are the things we discussed. What I want you to focus on is the contradiction in what was happening in that cell. What was happening was very human. It was very human. Everybody involved in that scenario was acting very humanly, but they were acting also like monstrous people. And the reason this contradiction exists is because it can happen in the dark. It can happen without anybody's watchful eyes on them. And it is that lack of watchful eyes, it is that presence of invisibility that we need to remove. So I'll give other examples. Imagine, I see Barrister Arman sitting there. So when he was in custody, he was in enforced disappearance for 8 years, right? Now, he was in enforced disappearance not in some underground location which you do not know of, which is extremely well hidden. He was in a location which is right opposite Dhaka Airport. Amira, you have crossed that location. Romana, you have. Anis, you have. All of us, anybody who's ever been to Dhaka Airport, has crossed the location in which this man was kept in solitary confinement for 8 years, where he could hear the sounds of torture inflicted on other individuals. These are not hidden locations. Similarly, Humam Kader, BNP who was kept detained for 7 months in enforced disappearance, he was not in some hidden location. It was, I have mapped the locations myself. It is 2 minutes walk from DGFI headquarters. It shares, the location he was in shares a common wall with the medical center. So everybody who was ill in that location, with their family members who was ill for those 7 months, visited that location, that detention, that wall which is shared by the detention center. These are not unknown locations. The only thing that makes them unknown is their invisibility, in that nobody can go knock on a door and enter. Nobody has that authority. That's the only thing that makes them invisible. They are actually in plain sight.